Have you ever felt it? That nagging feeling that the world is becoming a little too polished, a little too perfect, a little too fake? What if I told you that the music industry, the very machine that creates the soundtrack to our lives, is the biggest illusion of all? Here is a controversial truth. The success you see is often built on a foundation of lies. But once in a generation, something real breaks through, and when it does, it has the power to shatter everything. This is a story about that moment, a story that proves a single honest voice can be more powerful than $1 million empire. On one side of our story, we have Mackenzie Washington, a brilliant, powerful record producer living at the pinnacle of success. She's a millionaire who can create superstars from thin air, but she's completely exhausted, tired of the endless parade of fake talent that walks through her studio. She lives in a gilded cage of her own making, secretly starving for something authentic. On the other side, in the noise of the city streets, there's Douglas Meyer, a man with nothing but a worn-out guitar and a voice that carries the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He isn't looking for fame, he's just trying to survive by sharing his truth. Their two worlds were never meant to collide. But destiny had a different plan. Imagine the scene: this powerful woman, trapped in her limo, completely jaded by the industry. She commands, suddenly hears something that cuts through the noise. It's the voice of a simple street performer. And in that one moment, his raw, unfiltered, and deeply emotional voice absolutely shocked her to her core. It wasn't just good, it was a sound she thought was extinct, a hidden talent so pure it felt like a miracle. This is the heart of our story: what happens when a woman who has built her empire on selling beautiful lies discovers a man who is incapable of being anything but brutally honest. This isn't just a story about music, it's a story about redemption, destiny, and a love that blossoms in the most unlikely of circumstances. It explores whether real, authentic talent can survive in a world designed to manufacture it. Before we dive into this incredible journey of how his voice changed her life forever, I want to feel connected with every single one of you. Please, let me know in the comments what beautiful city or town you're watching from. Right now I want to imagine the scene with you. And if you believe in the power of real, undiscovered talent, do me a huge favor: hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And please, share this video with at least one person who you think will be touched by this story. You see, for a woman like Mackenzie Washington, silence was the most expensive luxury of all. As a powerful record producer, her world was a constant cacophony of manufactured sounds, a symphony of fake talent that made her ears and her soul bleed. She'd built an empire on computer-polished voices, becoming a millionaire in the process, but inside, she felt bankrupt. That afternoon, as her driver navigated the chaotic traffic, all she wanted was a moment of peace, a refuge from the artificial noise. But destiny has an ironic sense of humor, doesn't it? Through the armored glass of her car, a sound pierced the city's sonic pollution. A melody so raw and authentic, it acted like a defibrillator on her jaded heart. It was a voice. Not a voice that asked for permission to be heard, but one that simply existed, filled with a pain and hope that no software could ever replicate. Mackenzie, the woman who never looked back, felt an unseen force pull her, compelling her to a dead stop. She tried to dismiss it. Just another street performer, she muttered to herself, a mantra she used to shield herself from false hopes and wasted time. How many times had she heard aspiring artists murder songs for spare change? But this voice was different. It had a texture of sandpaper and velvet, a timbre that told an entire story in a single note. It was a sound so deeply emotional that it left her feeling completely vulnerable, a sensation she hadn't felt in years, perhaps decades. Ordering her driver to pull over, she stepped out of the car, the click of her expensive heels muffled by the city's hum. And then she saw him. On a forgotten street corner, there was Douglas Meyer, with nothing but a worn-out guitar and his soul laid bare for anyone to see. He wasn't performing for the crowd, he was singing to himself, a sacred ritual in the middle of urban chaos. This was the purest form of hidden talent she had ever encountered in her entire career. Mackenzie Washington was utterly, completely shocked, paralyzed. The cynicism that served as her daily armor began to crack, piece by piece, with every verse Douglas sang. This man wasn't just singing, he was bleeding his truth through music. It was a heart-aching performance that made her remember why she fell in love with music in the first place, long before it became a ruthless business of profit and loss. Sound was the antithesis of everything her pristine studio represented. She just stood there, a statue amidst the flow of pedestrians, the mind that closed million-dollar deals now short-circuiting. A surprise like this didn't happen in her meticulously controlled world. That voice was a plot twist in her own boring life story, an anomaly she couldn't simply ignore and leave behind. The big question hanging in the air, thick as the city humidity, wasn't if the voice was valuable, but what she, Mackenzie, would do next with the discovery that could change everything. Back in her pristine studio, the world felt cold and sterile again, a universe away from the warmth of that street corner. This was her kingdom, a high-tech fortress built on the bones of manufactured hits. She sat behind a sprawling mixing console, her expression unreadable as another young artist, dripping in designer clothes, sang into a $1,000 microphone. The voice coming through the speakers was perfect, technically flawless, and completely, utterly dead. It was the sound of fake talent at its peak. "Stop," Mackenzie said, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. The aspiring starlet looked up, confused. "We've been at this for 3 hours, and I still don't believe a word you're singing. It's hollow." The air grew tense. In this high-stakes world, Mackenzie Washington didn't mince words. Her reputation as a record producer was built on creating perfection, even if that perfection was a beautiful lie. She had no time for mediocrity, especially the kind that pretended to be something it wasn't. She dismissed the artist with a wave of her hand, the young singer leaving the studio on the verge of tears. Her team exchanged nervous glances but knew better than to say a word. This was Mackenzie in her element, cynical, demanding, and tired. She was a millionaire who could buy anything except the one thing she secretly craved, an authentic feeling. The encounter was a stark reminder of the plastic world she had created, a world she was suddenly, desperately tired of. The contrast between this auto-tuned puppet and the raw voice of the street performer was almost comical. Douglas Meyer's voice was still echoing in her mind, a ghost of genuine emotion haunting her soundproofed sanctuary. What she had just dismissed was the very product she sold to the world, and for the first time, it felt like a betrayal. The sound she heard on that street corner was a surprise that had recalibrated her entire understanding of music. She leaned back, the silence of the studio now feeling heavy, oppressive. It was the silence of a tomb, not a creative space. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just tired of fake talent, she was disgusted by it. She was disgusted with herself for perpetuating it. That hidden talent she'd discovered wasn't just a potential new artist, it was a chance, maybe her last one, for some kind of professional redemption. Her mind was made up. The sterile perfection of her studio felt like a cage, and she had just been shown the key. The memory of that heart-aching voice was a beacon. She couldn't let it fade away into the city's noise. Mackenzie picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She had to find him. She had to know if what she heard was real or just a mirage in her own creative desert. Miles away from Mackenzie's sterile high-rise, Douglas Meyer packed up his battered guitar case. The corner he chose wasn't glamorous. It was a humble intersection where tired souls hurried home, their faces etched with the struggles of the day. He wasn't there to be discovered. He was there to survive, to connect, to pour out the feelings that were too heavy to carry alone. His powerful voice was a fixture in this small part of the city, a landmark of raw, unvarnished truth. His performance was a stark contrast to the polished acts Mackenzie managed. There were no lights, no stage, no pre-recorded tracks, just the man, his guitar, and a voice that held the genuine weight of pain and hope. Every note he sang was authentic, a page torn from his own life story. For the people who stopped to listen, he wasn't just a street performer, he was a storyteller, their storyteller. His music was a balm for their weary spirits, a truly heart-aching experience. While Mackenzie's world was built on manufactured perfection, Douglas was grounded in flawed reality. He sang about loss, about struggle, about finding a sliver of light in the deepest darkness. It was an emotional landscape that the auto-tuned artists in her studio couldn't even begin to comprehend. His music wasn't designed for radio play or streaming algorithms, it was designed for human hearts. It was the definition of hidden talent, shining brightly in the shadows of the city. Head count the few dollars and coins in his case, enough for a simple meal and a bed for the night. He wasn't chasing fame or aspiring to be a millionaire. His currency was the silent, knowing nods from strangers, the rare smile on a tired face, the feeling that for a few minutes, his music made someone else's burden a little lighter. This was his purpose, his quiet act of kindness to a world that had often been unkind to him. He was completely unaware that a world-famous record producer had been shocked by his voice just hours earlier. He had no idea that his simple, honest music had caused a seismic shift in the soul of a woman who traded in artifice. For him, it was just another day, another performance from the heart. He believed his destiny was to be this voice on the corner, a secret shared with the lonely and the lost. But as he slung his guitar over his shoulder and started to walk away, a sleek black car pulled up beside him, its tinted window gliding down silently. The world he knew, the simple and authentic world of the street, was about to collide with a world of contracts, cameras, and compromise. The quiet life of Douglas Meyer was on the verge of a dramatic and unforeseen plot twist. Mackenzie Washington stepped out of the car, her sharp silhouette a stark contrast to the gritty street corner. She held a pristine business card in her hand, but her expression was all business too. "Douglas Meyer," she stated, not asked. "My name is Mackenzie Washington. I'm a record producer, and I want to offer you a life-changing contract." Her words were direct, cold, and devoid of the wonder she'd felt just hours before. This was a transaction, and she was in control. Douglas looked at the impeccably dressed woman and the expensive car, then back at the contract she was practically waving in his face. It was the kind of surprise you see in movies, the sort of thing that doesn't happen in real life, especially not to a street performer like him. He felt a jolt of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deep sense of caution. Her offer was a lifeline, but her eyes were like a hawk's, calculating and intense. "A contract?" he asked, his voice softer now without the backing of his guitar. "You heard me sing for 5 minutes on a street corner. You don't know anything about me or my music." He was wary of her intentions. The music industry, from what little he knew of it, was notorious for chewing up authentic artists and spitting out manufactured products. He feared his music, born from real pain, would become just another piece of fake talent in her portfolio. Mackenzie's smile was thin, impatient. "I know talent when I hear it. What you have is a raw, marketable diamond. I can make you a millionaire. I can put your voice in every corner of the world. All you have to do is sign." Her businesslike offer felt less like an invitation and more like a demand. She wasn't speaking the language of art, she was speaking the language of commerce, and it made Douglas' soul wary. This wasn't the magical moment of discovery he might have once dreamed of. It felt cold, corporate. This woman didn't seem to care about the emotional stories behind his songs. She cared about the product she could create. The interaction was anything but heartaching. He clutched his guitar a little tighter, the worn wood a familiar comfort against the intimidating gleam of her offer. He had a gift, a hidden talent, but he feared she saw it as a commodity. He looked from the contract back to her unyielding face. He knew this was his one shot, a door opening that might never open again. It felt like destiny was knocking, but it looked an awful lot like a deal with the devil. "I need to think about it," he said quietly, not out of arrogance, but out of a desperate need to protect the only thing he truly owned, the integrity of his music. He wondered if this opportunity was a blessing or the beginning of his own artistic redemption, or ruin. The first meeting took place in Mackenzie's glass-walled office, overlooking the entire city. It was a world away from the humble street corner where Douglas Meyer felt at home. Her team, a slick group of marketing gurus and stylists, buzzed around. Him like well-dressed bees, they saw a project, a blank canvas. "The whole street performer look is a bit rough," one said, circling him. "We need to make you more marketable, more relatable to a younger demographic." They laid out a plan for a complete makeover, new clothes, a new haircut, even a suggestion to soften the raw edges of his voice to make it more radio-friendly. Mackenzie watched from her desk, silent, letting her team do their thing. This was her process, the one shed used to churn out stars and build her millionaire empire. But as she watched them try to sand down every authentic part of Douglas, a strange feeling of unease settled in her stomach. Douglas listened politely, his hands clasped together. He wasn't angry or intimidated, just resolute. When they finished their pitch, he finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I appreciate the thought you've put into this," he began, "but I have to refuse." A surprised silence fell over the room. No one ever said no to Mackenzie Washington's team. They were the best in the business of creating stars from what was often fake talent, my music. "It's not separate from who I am," he continued, looking directly at Mackenzie, bypassing her team entirely. "These old clothes, this worn-out guitar, the sound of my voice, they are all part of the stories I tell. If you change me, you change the music. And my music is not for sale." His assertion was a quiet rebellion, a powerful statement in a room built on compromise and artifice. He was asserting that his identity was intrinsically tied to his art. The team was shocked, flustered. They looked to Mackenzie for guidance, expecting her to put this upstart in his place. But Mackenzie was intrigued. She had spent years working with artists who would do anything for fame, who would change their name, their face, their sound on a whim. Douglas' polite refusal was the most genuine thing she had witnessed in her office in years. This wasn't just hidden talent, it was hidden strength. This polite refusal was a small but significant plot twist. Instead of being angry, Mackenzie felt a flicker of respect. She waved a hand, dismissing her stunned team. "Leave us," she said, her eyes never leaving Douglas. For the first time, she saw him not as a product to be molded, but as a man of integrity. This quiet act of defiance was more heartaching than any ballad, and it set the stage for a partnership far more complex than she had ever imagined. News of Mackenzie's new prospect traveled fast in the incestuous world of the music industry. Before Douglas had even signed a contract, Marcus Thorne, a rival record producer known for his flashy, formulaic pop hits, made his move. Thorne cornered Douglas outside the studio, a predatory smile on his face. "I heard about Mackenzie's offer," he said smoothly. "I'm prepared to double it. She'll turn you into a product. It'll make you a star." It was a tempting offer, a shortcut to the life of a millionaire that most people could only dream of. Thorne represented the easy path, the one paved with glitter and gold, even if it was built on a foundation of fake talent. For a man who counted coins at the end of each day, the sum Marcus Thorne whispered was staggering. It was the kind of money that could solve every problem he had ever had. It was a genuine surprise. Douglas, however, looked at the ostentatious, producer, and saw a reflection of the very world he feared. He saw the machine that cared more about sales than soul. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Thorne," Douglas said, his tone even and respectful, "but I'm not interested in a bidding war." Thorne was taken aback, his confident smirk faltering for a second. He wasn't used to being turned down, especially not by a street performer. Later, Douglas went to Mackenzie's office and told her about the encounter. She listened, her expression unreadable, expecting him to use Thorne's offer as leverage for a better deal. That's how the game was played. But Douglas surprised her again. "I told him no," he said simply. "I came here because your face, when you first heard me sing, you looked shocked. You saw something real. I'm more interested in protecting that than I am in the extra money." This was a pivotal moment. Mackenzie had spent her career navigating a world of greed and backstabbing. Loyalty was a foreign concept. Douglas' decision to turn down a bigger offer, not for her, but for the sake of his artistic integrity, was a profound statement. It was a quiet act of defiance against the entire system she both commanded and despised. It was a form of redemption, not for him, but for the very idea of an authentic artist. For the first time, Mackenzie Washington felt a flicker of something other than professional interest. It was respect, pure and simple. This wasn't just about his hidden talent anymore. It was about his character. This unexpected turn of events, this small plot twist, subtly began to shift their dynamic. It wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It was the beginning of a fragile, unspoken alliance, and maybe, just maybe, the start of a very different kind of love story. The recording booth was a battlefield of egos. Mackenzie had booked the studio for Douglas, but also had a session with Celeste, a famous pop star she had manufactured from scratch years ago. Celeste, draped in diamonds and arrogance, watched Douglas with a mocking smirk as he set up his simple gear. "Is this a joke, Mac?" She whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's with the charity case?" "This is a studio, not a homeless shelter." The engineers chuckled nervously. Douglas simply ignored her, tuning his old guitar with a focused calm. He was a street performer in a den of wolves, and he knew it. Celeste represented everything he wasn't: polished, entitled, and a master of fake talent. Her voice a product of countless hours of digital manipulation. Mackenzie watched the interaction, a test of sorts. She wanted to see how Douglas would handle the pressure cooker of her world. Celeste continued her taunts. "Let's hear it then. Sing for your supper." She leaned back, expecting a shaky, amateur performance she could tear apart. Mackenzie gave Douglas a subtle nod. "Just one, Douglas," she said. "No guitar, just your voice." It was a bold move, stripping him bare in front of his harshest critic. A hush fell over the control room. The air was thick with anticipation. And then he sang. Douglas closed his eyes, and from his soul, an unaccompanied melody poured out, filling the studio with breathtaking power. It was a voice that was at once wounded and resilient, a sound so raw and emotional it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It was more than a song, it was a confession, a prayer, a storm. It was the most authentic thing that had ever echoed off those soundproofed walls. The entire studio was left speechless, utterly shocked. The engineers stared at their consoles as if they'd seen a ghost. Celeste's smug expression melted away, replaced by one of pure, unadulterated disbelief. In that moment, her fame, her diamonds, and her auto-tuned career felt like a cheap imitation. She had just been humbled by pure, undeniable, hidden talent. The silence that followed his last note was more profound than any applause. Mackenzie felt a wave of triumph wash over her. It was a heart-aching vindication of her instincts. This wasn't just about a good voice, it was about a force of nature. The pop star's stunned silence was the ultimate confirmation. The quiet street performer had just proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that he belonged. The plot twist was that his simple style wasn't a weakness, it was an unstoppable power. Late one night, unable to sleep, Mackenzie found herself alone in the studio, sifting through Douglas' things. He had left behind a worn leather notebook, and curiosity got the better of her. She opened it, feeling like an intruder, but an irresistible pull urged her on. The pages were filled with his familiar, neat handwritten scrawled lyrics, half-formed poems, and raw, unfiltered thoughts. It was a window into the soul of the man behind the powerful voice. She began to read the lyrics to his most personal song, the one he had sung unaccompanied in the studio, the one that had left everyone so shocked. The words were simple, but they carried an immense weight. They weren't just abstract verses about pain, they were a story. A devastatingly clear and emotional story about the day he lost his entire family in a tragic car accident. It was all the grief, the guilt, the loneliness. This discovery was the most profound plot twist in her understanding of Douglas Meyer. She had seen him as a vessel for remarkable talent, a hidden talent she could shape and sell. But these words revealed the source of his art. His music wasn't a performance, it was a testimony. Every heart-aching note Shed heard him sing was born from a place of unimaginable loss. He wasn't just a street performer, he was a survivor. Mackenzie sat there in the pale glow of the mixing console, tears silently streaming down her face. For the first time, she saw the man, not the artist. She saw Douglas. Her cynical, guarded heart, the heart of a cutthroat record producer, broke for him. The professional admiration she felt was suddenly dwarfed by a wave of deep, human empathy. This wasn't about a contract or an album anymore. It was about him. This was the first true glimpse into the man behind the powerful voice, a glimpse he had not intentionally given. It felt like a sacred secret, and she felt a strange mix of shame for her intrusion and a powerful connection to his pain. His authenticity wasn't an act or a brand, it was the hard-won result of enduring a tragedy that would have destroyed most people. This was the source of his authentic sound. This newfound knowledge changed everything. It reframed their entire relationship, adding a new layer of depth and meaning. The seeds of a love story were being sown, not in romance, but in a shared, unspoken understanding of human suffering. She now felt a fierce protective instinct towards him and his story. She knew she had to honor his truth, a truth that made the world of fake talent she inhabited seem more hollow than ever before. The annual industry gala was Mackenzie's personal hell, a glittering spectacle of forced smiles, empty compliments, and naked ambition. She had brought Douglas hoping he would network, schmooze with the executives, and play the part of the rising star. It was a necessary evil in the world of a record producer, a game of politics she had long since mastered. She expected him to be intimidated, perhaps even a little starstruck by the display of wealth and power. But Douglas was different. While Mackenzie was deep in a conversation with a lecherous label head, she lost sight of him. Panic flickered in her chest. Had he bolted? Was he overwhelmed? She scanned the opulent ballroom, a sea of tuxedos and gowns, and couldn't find him anywhere. She finally spotted him near the kitchens, far from the epicenter of power and influence, where she had left him. What she saw next was a quiet, unassuming act that landed like a bombshell in her cynical world. Douglas was sitting with one of the kitchen workers, a young man on his break. He had taken his own untouched gourmet plate from the gala and was sharing it with the worker, listening intently as the young man spoke. It wasn't a performance or a photo op, it was a simple, profound act of kindness, completely invisible to the powerful people in the room. Mackenzie stood frozen, watching this genuine human connection unfold in a room overflowing with fake talent and fake conversations. The scene quietly shamed her. She, the great millionaire, moved through these events seeing people as chess pieces, as assets or liabilities. Douglas, the humble street performer, saw them simply as people. It was a heart-aching, Moment of clarity for her. His wealth wasn't in money, it was in his character. She had been so focused on his hidden talent that she had almost missed the real treasure, his unbreakable spirit and his authentic soul. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being himself. This quiet act of sharing a meal was more powerful than any hit record. It was a testament to who he was when no one important was watching, and it was a quality she realized she desperately lacked. This was another unexpected plot twist in her journey with him. He wasn't just her artist, he was becoming her moral compass. His simple decency was a form of redemption for her own jaded worldview. As she walked back to her table alone, she felt a subtle shift inside her. The gala, with all its power and prestige, suddenly felt small and insignificant compared to the quiet act of humanity she had just witnessed. The biggest ghost from Mackenzie's past had a name: Julian Croft. He was the arrogant, platinum-selling singer she had meticulously created years ago, her ex-lover. Julian was the epitome of fake talent, his success built on her production genius and a mountain of auto-tune. He saw Douglas not as an artist, but as a threat, a direct challenge to his manufactured throne. Professional jealousy radiated from him like cheap cologne. When Julian heard Douglas' raw demo tape, the one filled with such authentic emotion, he knew he was in trouble. He saw that Mackenzie had found something real, a hidden talent that could make his own polished act obsolete. So he did what insecure people do: he decided to sabotage it. He cornered a young, impressionable audio engineer, a kid who owed him a favor, and pressured him into accidentally corrupting the master files of Douglas' demo. The next day, when Mackenzie and Douglas sat down for a listening session, the sound that came from the speakers was a distorted, digital nightmare. Douglas' heart-aching vocals were shredded, the warmth of his guitar twisted into a screeching mess. Douglas looked confused and hurt, while Mackenzie felt a cold, familiar rage build in her chest. She knew this wasn't an accident. This had Julian's fingerprints all over it. This act of sabotage was a direct attack, not just on Douglas, but on her. Julian was trying to remind her that he was her creation, that she couldn't simply replace him with some street performer. It was a cruel power play designed to create a rift between Mackenzie and her new artist, to make Douglas lose faith in her ability to protect his music. For a moment, the calculated cruelty of her world threatened to swallow their fragile partnership whole. Mackenzie was shocked not by the act itself, but by the flood of old feelings it brought back: the toxicity of her relationship with Julian, the compromises she had made. She had built her millionaire empire with people like him, and now her past was coming back to haunt her. This was more than professional jealousy, it was a personal war, and Douglas was caught in the middle. But this venomous plot twist would have an unintended consequence. Instead of driving them apart, it would test the foundation of their trust. Mackenzie looked at the disappointment on Douglas' face and felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised even her. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. Julian had just made a grave mistake, and Mackenzie Washington was about to show him what happened when someone threatened the one emotional investment she had made in years. The sabotage attempt sent ripples through the studio. While Mackenzie was hunting down the source of the glitch, Douglas overheard two senior industry executives talking in the hallway. They were discussing him, but more pointedly, they were discussing Mackenzie. "She's ruthless," one of them said with a cynical laugh. "She'd sell her own mother for a hit record. This poor street performer has no idea he's just her next meal ticket." Douglas stopped, hidden from their view. He had his own reservations about Mackenzie, the powerful record producer. He knew she was tough, demanding, and lived in a world that was alien to him. But ruthless? The word didn't sit right. He thought about the look in her eyes when she first heard him sing, the way she had quietly respected his refusal of a makeover, the protective fire he saw in her when his demo was destroyed. Instead of letting the comments slide, or worse, letting It confirmed his own fears. Douglas stepped out from the corner. The executives were startled, shocked to see him. "You're wrong about her," Douglas said, his voice calm but firm. The executives, both powerful men who could make or break careers, looked at him with disdain. "Excuse me?" one of them scoffed. "I said." "You're wrong," Douglas repeated. "If seen a side of her, you clearly haven't. She's fighting for my music, for its integrity. She believes in something authentic, and in this business, that doesn't sound ruthless. It sounds like courage." It was an incredible act of loyalty, a public defense of her character from the most unlikely of sources. He was showing her a form of allegiance she had never known in her entire career. Later, one of the executives, looking to stir up trouble, recounted the entire conversation to Mackenzie. He expected her to be angry at Douglas for overstepping. Instead, she was stunned into silence. In her world, loyalty was a commodity, traded for favors and contracts. No one had ever defended her character, especially not without being asked. It was a profound, heart-aching gesture that chipped away at the last of her emotional armor. This was a plot twist she never saw coming. This man, whom she had plucked from obscurity, was now defending her honor to the very people she fought against daily. It was a moment of redemption for her, seen through his eyes. This wasn't a business relationship anymore. The lines had blurred completely, paving the way for a much deeper, more complicated love story than either of them could have anticipated. His kindness was becoming her anchor. Haunted by Douglas' unexpected loyalty, Mackenzie found herself driving through the city late one night, her car moving on autopilot. She ended up back on the same humble street corner where her journey with him had begun. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a return to the origin of this massive plot twist in her life. She stayed in her car, the engine off, and just watched the spot where the street performer had changed her destiny. A few locals were gathered nearby, talking and laughing. An old woman who ran a newspaper stand, a young couple heading home from work. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, Mackenzie got out of her car and approached them, a powerful millionaire, feeling completely out of place. "Excuse me," she said softly. "The man who usually plays music here, do you know him?" The old woman's face lit up. "Oh, you mean Douglas," she said with a warm smile. "He's our angel." One by one, they began to share stories. They told her how Douglas' emotional music had given them hope during hard times, how had used his earnings to buy groceries for the old woman when she was sick, how his songs had become the heart-aching soundtrack to their resilient working-class lives. Mackenzie listened, completely captivated. These weren't fans talking about a celebrity, they were neighbors talking about a friend. They didn't know he had a hidden talent that could shake the music industry. They just knew the man, the source of all that authentic sound. They knew his kindness. She was hearing about a side of him that no recording contract could ever capture. The profound impact of his simple existence. This secret visit was a revelation. She, the great record producer, measured an artist's worth in units sold and chart positions. She had been so focused on the scale of his talent that she hadn't truly grasped the depth of his character. Hearing these stories, she realized his music wasn't a performance to escape his life. It was an extension of it, a way of giving back to the world that had taken so much from him. She returned to her car, her heart aching with a beautiful, painful clarity. The artist she was fighting for wasn't just a voice, he was a pillar of a community she never knew existed. This was his redemption, not from poverty, but a redemption of the very purpose of music itself. As she drove away, she felt more determined than ever. She wasn't just protecting a future star, she was protecting a genuinely good man, and that was a fight worth losing everything for. The calm before the storm broke with a single brutal phone call. Arthur Vance, the label's main investor and a man who saw music as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet, was on the line. "Mackenzie," He started, his voice cold and devoid of pleasantries. "I've reviewed the projections for your new project. This street performer, the numbers are soft. The demographic is uncertain. He is, in a word, risky." Mackenzie felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She knew this call was coming. Arthur, his talent is undeniable. He's authentic. The focus groups have been. Vance cut her off. "I don't care about focus groups. I care about returns. We have a pop trio from Sweden with a guaranteed hit. They're safe. They're what sells. This Douglas Meyer is a passion project, and I am not in the business of funding your hobbies." The threat was laid bare, cold and sharp. "Drop the risky street performer," Vance commanded, "or I'm pulling all funding. Not just from his project, but from the entire label. I will liquidate my shares, and your company will be insolvent by the end of the quarter." The ultimatum was a death sentence. He was asking her to choose between Douglas and the empire she had spent her entire life building. This was the ultimate test. Her company, her status as a millionaire, her reputation as a formidable record producer, all of it was on the line. Vance wanted her to revert to her old ways, to choose the profitable, marketable fake talent over the unpredictable, emotional truth that Douglas represented. It was a cruel, calculated move designed to force her back into the box she had been so desperately trying to escape. She ended the call, the silence in her office deafening. The weight of the decision was crushing. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, was being threatened by her belief in one man. Was his hidden talent worth the destruction of her entire legacy? The industry she knew would call her a fool for even hesitating. They would tell her to cut him loose and save herself. But this wasn't just about a risky artist anymore. This was about her own redemption. Giving up on Douglas would mean giving up on the part of herself he had reawakened. It would be the ultimate act of self-betrayal. Faced with losing her company, Mackenzie stood at a precipice, forced to make a choice that would define not just her career, but the very essence of who she was. The final devastating plot twist was now in her hands. The days that followed Arthur Vance's ultimatum were a special kind of hell for Mackenzie. She walked the halls of her company, the empire she had built from the ground up, and saw it all through a new lens. Every gold record on the wall, every award on her shelf, felt like a monument to a life she was no longer sure she wanted. They were symbols of her success, yes, but also symbols of the compromises that had hollowed her out, the very fake talent she had championed. She sat through meetings in a daze, her team pitching commercial acts, safe bets, and formulaic hits, the very things Vance wanted. They were trying to save the company, their jobs. They couldn't understand her hesitation. To them, dropping the risky street performer was the obvious logical choice. Protecting her empire was paramount. But for Mackenzie, the choice was anything but logical. It was deeply, terrifyingly emotional. One evening, she stood on the balcony of her penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath her like a carpet of scattered jewels. She was a millionaire, a queen in her castle, but she felt like a prisoner. Protecting this empire meant killing the one authentic thing that had entered her life in years. It meant betraying Douglas Meyer. It meant becoming the ruthless, soulless record producer everyone already thought she was. Her mind raced, replaying every moment since she'd first heard his voice. The surprise on that street corner, his quiet integrity in her office, his act of kindness at the gala, his unexpected loyalty. He was more than a hidden talent, he was a reminder of the person she might have been. Believing in him was a gamble, the biggest of her career, but not believing in him felt like a guaranteed loss of something far more valuable. This was her moment of reckoning, the crossroads of her destiny. Would she choose the cold, hard security of her fortune, or the warm, uncertain promise of his talent? The struggle was a war within her soul. The businesswoman fought the artist. The cynic fought the believer. It was a heart-aching battle that no one else could see, a fight for her own redemption. She walked back inside, away from the glittering, empty view. Her choice was becoming clear, not through logic, but through feeling. What was the point of having an empire if you had to sacrifice your soul to keep it? The question hung in the silent, opulent air. Protecting her empire was one thing, but protecting her belief in something true, in Douglas' authentic talent, that was a cause worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Late that night, Mackenzie couldn't bring herself to go to bed. The investor's deadline was looming, a guillotine hanging over her career. She retreated to the one place that felt like a sanctuary, the studio. She dimmed the lights, sat alone in the vast control room, and pressed play on the final, restored mix of Douglas' demo. His voice, clear and pure, filled the silence, a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside her. As she listened, it was no longer the record producer hearing a potential hit. It was just a woman listening to a man pour his entire soul into a song. The music, a heart-aching ballad about finding light after loss, washed over her. It was a song of redemption, of hope against all odds. Every note was a testament to his unbreakable spirit, the same spirit that had refused a makeover, turned down more money, and defended her honor. And in that quiet, vulnerable moment, a final wall inside her crumbled. The professional admiration, the protective instinct, the deep respect, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. She was in love with him. Not just his voice, his hidden talent, or his potential to be a star. She was in love with Douglas Meyer. She had fallen in love with his authentic soul, his quiet kindness, his unwavering integrity. This realization was the ultimate plot twist, the one that had been building under the surface all along. This entire journey, this fight for his music, was never just about business. It was, from the very beginning, a love story. It was her destiny to find him, not to make him a millionaire, but for him to save her from her own gilded cage. He was the most emotional and real thing in her life. A single tear rolled down her cheek, a tear not of sadness or fear, but of profound clarity. The choice was no longer a choice. Losing her company would be painful, but losing the chance to stand by this man, to champion his truth, would be unbearable. Arthur Vance could take her money and her label. He could not take this feeling. He could not take her newfound belief in something pure. She finally admitted it to herself, whispering the words into the empty studio, "I love him." Saying it aloud solidified her resolve. She now knew what she had to do. The Macker Break showcase was in 2 days. The industry expected her to capitulate, to present a safe commercial act. They were about to be very, very shocked. Mackenzie Washington wasn't going to save her empire. She was going to bet it all on one man and his guitar. The showcase was electric with tension. Investors, critics, and industry sharks filled the exclusive venue, all waiting to see Mackenzie Washington's next move. Arthur Vance sat in the front row, his expression smug, confident he had backed her into a corner. The lights dimmed. A slick, pre-produced backing track began to play the sound of the safe commercial pop trio Vance had demanded. The audience nodded along. This was the familiar sound of money, the polished gleam of fake talent. Douglas stood in the wings, his face a mask of disappointment. He looked at Mackenzie, a silent question in his eyes. She met his gaze, and in that moment, a decision that had been forged in the lonely studio became an action. She walked calmly onto the stage, held up a hand, and said 2 words that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room: "Stop the track." The music screeched to a halt. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Vance looked utterly shocked. In a move of stunning defiance, a plot twist no one saw coming, Mackenzie took the microphone. "For years, I've sold you what you wanted to hear," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Tonight, I want you to hear something you need to hear." She turned and gestured to the wings. Douglas Meyer, She then did the unthinkable. She defied her investors on a public stage, silencing the very product they had demanded. Douglas walked out, armed with only his guitar. Mackenzie gave him a small, determined nod. "Sing your song, Douglas," she whispered. "The one you wrote for them." He sat on a lone stool, and as a nervous hush fell over the crowd, he began to play. He sang his most honest, most emotional song, the one about his family. The raw, authentic power of his voice, unadorned and pure, filled the room, a heart-aching wave of truth in an ocean of artifice. The effect was immediate and profound. Critics were weeping. Hardened executives sat mesmerized. Vance was pale, his victory turned to dust. When the final note faded, there was a beat of stunned silence, and then the room erupted. It was a roar of genuine, overwhelming applause. They hadn't just heard a hidden talent, they had experienced a moment of pure, undeniable art. Mackenzie had proven that his raw talent was more valuable than any fortune. In that moment, she won everything. A rival investor, moved by the performance, approached her immediately, offering to buy out Vance's shares and fund a new label focused on authentic artists. She had not only secured the deal, but had started a revolution. As the applause continued, Douglas looked at her from the stage, his eyes full of gratitude and love. She had found her redemption. She had followed her destiny. She had won both the deal and her heart, cementing a love story for the ages. And so, a story that began on a lonely street corner ends in a victory that redefines an entire industry. What a journey! We witnessed Mackenzie Washington, a woman trapped in a golden cage of her own making, find her redemption not in another platinum record, but in the authentic soul of a street performer. We saw Douglas Meyer, a man who had lost everything, use his heart-aching gift not for fame, but to spread kindness, ultimately finding his true destiny. Theirs is a love story that proves that the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or fame, but a single, honest voice. Now I want to turn it over to you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Was it the moment Douglas defended Mackenzie's character, or when she secretly visited his old corner and learned about his impact on the community? Please share what you felt in the comments below. I'm also curious, was this the ending you were hoping for? Or did you expect a different, perhaps more tragic, plot twist? I'd love to know if you were happy with the desfecho presented. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of genuine talent, please take a second to hit that like button. It helps our channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe and join our community. We have a library full of older videos with emotional journeys just like this one, and you absolutely don't want to miss the powerful new stories we have coming your way. Thank you for sharing this time with us. We can't wait to see you in the next video.